Michael was tired. After a long day working in the small town's auto repair shop, all he wanted was to get home, grab a bite and relax. The sky was grey and rain had started falling softly, turning the streets slick and cold. He pulled his jacket tighter around him as he walked down the dimly lit sidewalk, his thoughts drifting between the day's work and the slow countdown to payday. As Michael passed a narrow alley between two old buildings, something caught his eye. A faint movement near a dumpster. He stopped, his breath visible in the chilly air. Squinting, he saw a small shape curled up on the wet concrete. As he got closer, his heart sank. It was a dog, not just any dog. This one was so thin, its ribs showed sharply beneath its filthy, matted fur. It shivered uncontrollably, huddled against the cold wall like it was trying to disappear from the world. Michael crouched down a few feet away, not wanting to scare it, but wanting to get closer too. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, pulling out the sandwich he'd packed for his lunch. The dog lifted its head slowly, eyes tired and wary, but fixed on Michael. Michael tore off a piece of bread and held it out. The dog didn't move at first, but hunger won over fear, and it took the piece gently from Michael's hand. That moment, the fragile connection between a stranger and a lost soul, stuck with Michael. He looked around. The alley was empty. No one else had stopped to help. People usually ignored stray animals in this town, or worse, chased them away. But Michael couldn't just walk away. "Let's get you out of this rain," Michael said, standing up and pulling his jacket off. He wrapped it around the dog as best he could and carefully scooped it into his arms. The dog didn't protest, just rested its head against Michael's chest. The walk home was slow. Michael kept looking down at the dog, its thin legs trembling, eyes half closed. "We'll get you fixed up," he promised quietly. The dog, for all its weakness, seemed to understand somehow. When Michael reached his small apartment, he laid the dog gently on an old blanket by the heater. He grabbed a bowl of water and some leftover chicken from the fridge, placing it near the dog. Shadow, that's what Michael decided to call him, because the dog seemed like a forgotten shadow of a life once better. But Shadow didn't eat right away. He just lay there, breathing shallowly as Michael watched over him. Michael called the local vet, hoping to bring Shadow in the morning, but worry gnawed at him. The dog looked so fragile, Michael feared he might not last the night. He sat down, beside Shadow, stroking his fur gently despite its roughness. "You're safe now," Michael whispered, almost to himself. The dog's eyes flickered open, and for a moment Michael thought he saw a spark of recognition. The night was long and sleepless. Michael listened to Shadow's quiet whimpers and shallow breaths. He thought about the people who had passed by earlier, blind to the suffering right in front of them. Michael's mind raced through questions. Who had abandoned this dog? Had he been hurt? Starved on purpose? Michael didn't have answers. All he knew was that he couldn't turn away. By dawn, Shadow stirred more, trying to stand but wobbling on weak legs. Michael helped him steady and brought him outside for fresh air. The morning light softened the harshness of the alley scene. Michael had witnessed the night before. Now Shadow was more than a stray bugger. He was a chance. A second chance. Michael called the vet again and explained everything. He made an appointment for later that day. As he waited, Michael researched online about caring for malnourished dogs, determined to do everything right. Despite his tight budget and daily struggles, Michael felt a strange surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this dog could change both their lives. When the vet finally examined Shadow, Michael held his breath. The vet was honest but kind. Shadow was in bad shape, yes, severely malnourished, dehydrated and carrying some injuries. The treatment and care would cost nearly $500. Michael's heart sank at the number. That was almost a month's rent. For him. But looking down at Shadow's trusting eyes, Michael didn't hesitate. "We'll do whatever it takes," Michael said firmly. On the way home, Michael thought about what lay ahead. Vet visits, medication, and weeks of nursing Shadow. Back to health. It wouldn't be easy. But sometimes the right thing to do wasn't the easiest. As Shadow settled back into Michael's apartment that evening, something had already begun to shift. Between the worn walls and the quiet moments of shared warmth, a bond was forming. one built on trust, hope and the promise that no one would ever be left behind again. The morning after Michael's vet visit, the weight of the news settled heavily on his shoulders. $500. It was a lot of money for a man who lived paycheck to paycheck, working long hours just to keep his small apartment and old truck running. The vet had been clear. Shadow needed immediate care, antibiotics for infection, vitamins for malnutrition, x-rays for his old injury, and close monitoring for the coming weeks. Michael sat at his worn kitchen table, staring at the vet's estimate. His mind raced through the numbers: rent, bills, groceries, and now this unexpected expense. He thought about the car he'd been meaning to fix for months. Without it, he couldn't get to work easily. He thought about calling his sister for help, but he hated feeling like a burden. Yet when he looked over at Shadow lying weakly on the blanket, eyes half closed but trusting, Michael's decision was clear. He could not abandon the dog now, not after everything he'd already seen. The dog had nothing left but Michael's kindness, and Michael was not going to let him down. That afternoon, Michael returned to the vet's office with the money in hand. The vet nodded approvingly and began treatment immediately. Michael watched as the vet gently cleaned Shadow's wounds, gave him the first dose of antibiotics, and explained what to expect in the days ahead. Shadow, despite his pain, seemed to sense Michael's presence and leaned into his touch. After the vet visit, Michael took Shadow to the pet store. He bought the softest dog bed he could find on sale, some gentle food specially made for recovering, dogs and a leash and collar. Shadow's frail legs struggled to keep up, but his tail wagged faintly at the new smells and sights. Walking home, Michael felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. He knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Friends at work teased him gently about playing dog dad, but Michael barely noticed. Shadow wasn't just a project, he was a life. One Michael was determined to save. Back in the apartment, Michael carefully prepared Shadow's meals, feeding him small amounts multiple times a day. Shadow ate slowly at first, sometimes refusing the food. Michael learned to be patient, waiting quietly until Shadow felt comfortable enough to try again. The two fell into a routine: quiet mornings by the heater, afternoon walks around the block, and evenings spent on the floor, side by side. Evenings were the hardest. Shadow shivered through the night, still haunted by pain and fear. Michael stayed up with him, offering gentle reassurances. He could feel the dog's heart racing, the trembles of old trauma that no medicine could erase overnight. To distract himself, Michael began researching everything he could about caring for traumatized animals. He found online forums filled with stories of rescue dogs, their struggles and their triumphs. He read about the slow, frustrating process of rebuilding trust, how some dogs took weeks or even months before they could relax fully. Michael also thought about his own life. He'd spent years trying to keep everything stable, a steady job, a roof over his head, but had never allowed himself to hope for something more. Now, with Shadow relying on him, Michael felt a new kind of responsibility. He wanted to be better, not just for Shadow, but for himself. Days turned into a week. Shadow's fur began to look less patchy and his eyes grew brighter. Michael noticed small signs: a wag of the tail when Michael came home, a tentative bark when the mailman arrived, even a playful nip during their walks. These moments, though brief, felt like victories. Michael's co-workers started noticing the change too. The man who once kept to himself now shared stories about his dog, smiling in a way they hadn't seen before. Some brought treats for Shadow or offered advice. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt part of something, a community, bound by shared love for their pets. But Michael knew the biggest challenge was yet to come, helping Shadow overcome the invisible wounds. There were days when Shadow flinched at sudden noises, cowered during thunderstorms, or refused to go outside. Michael learned to be patient, never forcing Shadow, but encouraging gently. He talked to local trainers and shelters, seeking advice on how to rebuild trust slowly. One rainy afternoon, Michael sat beside Shadow on the couch, stroking his fur as the storm raged outside. Shadow rested his head on Michael's knee, a rare moment of calm. Michael whispered, "We're in this together, buddy. You're not alone anymore." That night, Michael realized he hadn't felt this connected to anyone, human or animal, in years. Shadow was no longer just a starving dog from an alley. He was a reminder that sometimes hope comes when you least expect it. Michael's $500 wasn't just a vet bill. It was an investment in a new life, one built on trust, healing, and a bond that neither of them had ever thought possible. The days after Shadow's first treatment were filled with small but important battles. Michael knew that healing wasn't just about medicine or food. It was about rebuilding something far harder to fix: trust. Shadow was a dog who had learned fear and loneliness as his normal. Michael realized that no matter how much he wanted to help, he had to let Shadow set the pace. Shadow didn't run to greet Michael when he came home from work. He didn't jump excitedly or wag his tail wildly. Instead, he stayed low to the ground, sometimes hiding behind furniture or under the kitchen table. The noises of Michael's apartment, the clinking of dishes, the hum of the heater, made Shadow flinch more than once. Michael refused to rush him. Each morning, he sat quietly beside Shadow's blanket with a calm voice, speaking softly. He learned to read Shadow's small signals: a relaxed ear, a softened gaze, a tentative step forward. Each little sign was a victory worth celebrating. Feeding Shadow was a challenge. Some days he ate hungrily, his ribs pressing out against his skin. Other days he pushed away the bowl or whimpered in pain. Michael tried different foods: soft-boiled chicken, special recovery kibble, even plain rice, hoping to find what Shadow liked. Every bite eaten was a small triumph. One afternoon, Michael sat on the floor near Shadow, holding a chew toy he'd bought on a whim. He rolled it gently toward Shadow, half expecting the dog to ignore it. But Shadow sniffed it cautiously and, after a long pause, gave it a tentative nudge with his nose. Michael smiled wide, a spark of joy lighting up his tired eyes. It wasn't just Shadow who was healing. Michael found himself changing too. The long hours at work felt easier when he knew Shadow was waiting. The quiet evenings spent together weren't lonely anymore. Michael talked to Shadow as if he were an old friend, sharing his thoughts, his worries, even his hopes. Shadow listened, resting his head on Michael's knee as Michael spoke. One evening, Michael invited a friend over, someone who had always teased him about getting soft for animals. The friend was surprised to see Shadow so calm, lying on the floor, eyes half closed in comfort. Michael told the story of finding Shadow in the alley and the difficult journey since then. "He's come a long way," Michael said quietly. "Yeah," his friend replied, "looks like you saved each other." Those words stuck with Michael. In the mirror, he saw a reflection of someone who had opened his heart again, who had learned to care deeply despite the risks. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline. But progress wasn't linear. Some nights Shadow woke up barking, restless and scared. Michael would sit with him until he calmed down, speaking softly, stroking his fur. On a few occasions, Shadow tried to bolt out the door during walks, panic clear in his eyes. Michael never scolded him. Instead, he gently guided Shadow back, reassuring him with steady hands. Michael also took Shadow to a local dog trainer who specialized in rescue animals. The trainer explained how Shadow's behavior was typical of dogs who had been neglected or abused. Rebuilding trust meant patience, consistency, and a lot of love. "You're doing great," the trainer told Michael one afternoon. "Shadow knows he's safe with you. He's just scared of the world outside." Michael nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and determination. He was ready to do whatever it took. Slowly, Shadow started following Michael around the apartment. From the bedroom to the kitchen, Shadow's steps grew more confident. One morning, Michael woke up to find Shadow lying on his bed, a huge step for a dog who once avoided human touch. Michael laughed softly. "You're getting braver, aren't you?" Shadow looked up, his eyes meeting Michael's, and for the first time, Michael thought he saw gratitude there. Outside, the neighborhood was beginning to notice the change too. As Michael and Shadow took their daily walks, neighbors smiled and waved. A few stopped to ask about the dog who used to look like he was barely surviving. Michael shared their story with anyone who would listen, not just about the hardships, but about the hope. One afternoon, a little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and said, "Look, Mom, the dog that was so skinny, he's all better now." Michael smiled at Shadow, who wagged his tail for the first time in full, a slow but happy wag that made Michael's heart swell. The journey was far from over. Shadow still had fears, and Michael still had worries. But each day, with every small victory, Michael knew they were building something stronger. A bond that could heal wounds neither had expected to face alone. As Michael sat beside Shadow that night, stroking his fur under the soft glow of the lamp, he whispered, "We'll get through this, together." And Shadow, for the first time, rested without fear. The following weeks brought a slow but steady change, not just in Shadow, but in Michael too. The dog that had once trembled at every sound was starting to discover something he hadn't felt in a long time: safety. Each day, Shadow pushed a little further beyond his fears, and Michael watched with a mix of pride and hope. Michael made a ritual out of their daily walks, rain or shine. He would carefully clip Shadow's leash on and step outside, the cool, morning air filling their lungs. Shadow still hesitated at first, pausing at the door, looking back with uncertain eyes, but Michael's steady voice and gentle hand coaxed him forward. One morning, as they walked down the quiet street, lined with maple trees, Shadow stopped abruptly. Michael noticed a group of neighborhood kids playing nearby. Shadow's ears flattened and his body tensed. Michael knelt down and whispered, "It's okay, buddy. Just breathe." He waited patiently, letting Shadow watch from a safe distance. Slowly, Shadow's tension eased and he even took a cautious step forward. Michael smiled. Progress. The kids noticed Shadow too. Instead of running away or making loud noises, they slowed down and waved softly. One little boy tossed a small ball in Shadow's direction. Shadow sniffed it. Then, after a long pause, tapped it gently with his nose. The kids cheered quietly, careful not to overwhelm him. "Good job, Shadow," Michael said softly, ruffling the dog's ears. News of Shadow's improvement spread through the neighborhood. Once overlooked and pitied, Shadow was becoming a favorite. Neighbors stopped to say hello, offer treats, or ask about his story. Michael found himself opening up more, sharing how a starving dog from an alley had become the center of his world. One afternoon, Michael decided to bring Shadow to the local park. It was a place full of life. Children laughing, joggers passing by, and dogs playing off-leash in a fenced area. Michael knew Shadow wasn't ready for that yet. He kept him on a leash and found a quiet bench under a tall oak tree. Shadow sniffed. The air, his tail wagging slightly. A golden retriever bounded nearby, eyes bright with excitement. Shadow watched but didn't move to join. Michael stayed close, encouraging Shadow with calm words and occasional treats. After a few minutes, Shadow inched closer to the edge of the grass, curious but cautious. Michael noticed a small girl sitting alone on a swing. She smiled at Shadow, holding out her hand gently. Michael gave Shadow time, and eventually, Shadow approached the girl and sniffed her palm. It was a moment Michael had dreamed of, Shadow breaking through the walls he'd built around himself. The girl's mother walked over and said, "He's beautiful. What's his name?" "Shadow," Michael replied, pride swelling in his chest. "He's lucky to have you," the mother said with a warm smile. That evening, Michael felt a new kind of satisfaction. Shadow wasn't just surviving anymore, he was learning to live, but the road was not without its setbacks. Some nights Shadow's past would catch up to him. Thunderstorms made him tremble and bark. Unfamiliar sounds caused him to dart under the couch. Michael stayed patient, knowing these reactions were scars, not misbehavior. One night, a loud car backfire outside startled Shadow so badly he ran to Michael's bedroom door, whining. Michael opened it slowly, allowing Shadow to come inside and climb onto the bed beside him. Wrapping his arm around Shadow, Michael whispered, "You're safe, I'm here." The trust between them was growing, but Shadow's wounds ran deep. Michael also noticed changes in himself. Caring for Shadow had given him purpose beyond his routine. He felt more connected to the world around him, more open to new experiences. He started volunteering at a local animal shelter on weekends, inspired by Shadow's journey. The shelter's director told Michael, "You've got a special bond. Shadow is lucky to have you." Michael smiled, but knew the real luck was his. One afternoon, Shadow's progress was tested. As Michael clipped on the leash to go for a walk, Shadow hesitated near the door. Then, unexpectedly, he bolted forward, pulling Michael down the sidewalk faster than usual. Michael laughed breathlessly, catching up just as Shadow stopped at the park entrance. Okay, Michael said, heart racing. Ready to explore? Shadow sniffed the grass, tail wagging fully now. It was the first time Michael had seen Shadow so eager and free in weeks. Their bond was no longer just about survival. It was about life, together, step by step, breaking through the shadows of the past. The more time Michael and Shadow spent together, the more Michael realized how much the dog had changed his own life. Shadow was no longer the scared, starving animal Michael had found in the alley. He was a loyal companion who filled Michael's quiet apartment with a new kind of warmth. One afternoon, Michael came home from work to find Shadow waiting eagerly by the door, tail wagging with a happiness Michael hadn't seen before. It was a simple moment, but it made Michael's chest swell. Shadow wasn't just a pet. He was a friend, a partner in a life Michael was slowly learning to rebuild. Michael decided to take a day off work and dedicate it entirely to Shadow. They started with a slow morning walk to the nearby lake, where the water glistened under the bright sun. Shadow was cautious at first, stepping carefully onto the grass, but soon he was sniffing everything around him with curiosity. Michael sat on a bench, watching Shadow explore. The dog's eyes were brighter now, full of life and wonder. Michael pulled out a ball and tossed it gently. Shadow chased after it, tongue hanging out, and brought it back with a proud wag of his tail. "Good boy," Michael said, laughing. It was during moments like these that Michael felt the weight of his decision. To spend that $500 on Shadow wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about saving a part of himself. Shadow's healing was healing Michael too, but their newfound happiness wasn't without challenges. Shadow still had moments of fear and anxiety, especially around loud noises or sudden movements. One evening, as Michael cooked dinner, a plate slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor. Shadow jumped and ran under the couch, trembling. Michael knelt down and spoke softly. "It's okay, Shadow, I'm here." He spent the next hour coaxing Shadow out, his patience unwavering. Slowly, Shadow crept forward, and Michael rewarded him with gentle pets and quiet praise. "You're doing great," Michael whispered. Days passed. Michael realized that caring for Shadow required more than food and medicine. It needed understanding and kindness, even when progress was slow. One weekend, Michael took Shadow to a local pet fair. The place was bustling with people, dogs barking and vendors selling toys and treats. Michael was nervous. He wasn't sure how Shadow would react to the chaos. To Michael's surprise, Shadow handled the crowd better than expected. He sniffed the air cautiously but stayed close to Michael's side. A few children approached to pet him, and Shadow responded with gentle licks instead of fear. "He's really come a long way," Michael told a vendor selling homemade dog biscuits. The vendor smiled. "You've done a wonderful thing." At the fair, Michael met other dog owners who shared their own rescue stories. Their words gave him strength and hope. He realized that he wasn't alone in this journey, and neither was Shadow. But as Michael wanted to believe Shadow was safe now, the dog's past still lingered like a shadow over their lives. One afternoon, a neighbor's loud dog bark startled Shadow so badly he ran back into Michael's apartment, panting and wide-eyed. "It's okay, Shadow," Michael soothed, kneeling beside him. That night, Michael researched more about trauma in dogs and ways to help them cope. He bought calming treats and soft music designed to ease anxiety. He knew the road ahead would have bumps, but he was ready. Their bond grew stronger with every challenge. Michael found comfort in Shadow's presence after long, tiring days. Shadow found safety in Michael's steady care and affection. One evening, as Michael sat reading on the couch, Shadow climbed up beside him and rested his head on Michael's lap. Michael stroked Shadow's fur slowly, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing. "You're family now," Michael said, softly. Shadow's eyes closed in contentment. Michael thought back to the night he found Shadow in that cold alley, starving and alone. No one expected that a $500 vet bill would lead to this, a friendship that transformed both their lives. But sometimes, the most unexpected choices lead to the most extraordinary stories. And for Michael and Shadow, this was only the beginning. Life with Shadow had settled into a comforting rhythm, but Michael knew that healing was not a straight path. There were still days when Shadow's past came rushing back, moments when fear took hold despite all the progress they'd made. Michael braced himself for those challenges, ready to face them head-on with patience and love. One chilly autumn evening, Michael was returning home from work when he noticed Shadow acting strange in the car. The dog's usual calm demeanor had shifted to restless pacing, ears flat, and low whines escaping his throat. Michael reached over and gently rubbed Shadow's neck, trying to soothe him. "It's okay, buddy. We're almost home," Michael whispered. Once inside the apartment, Shadow darted from room to room, tail tucked, eyes wide. The sounds of the city, distant sirens, honking cars, seemed to overwhelm him. Michael realized Shadow was experiencing a panic attack. He grabbed the calming treats he'd bought weeks ago and sat quietly on the floor with Shadow in his lap. Michael's voice was soft, steady. "I'm here. You're safe." After what felt like an eternity, Shadow's breathing slowed and his body relaxed. Michael's relief was profound, but he also knew they had more work ahead. The next day, Michael called a behaviorist who specialized in trauma recovery for dogs. He scheduled sessions, hoping professional help would ease Shadow's anxiety. Those sessions were both challenging and hopeful. The behaviorist worked with Michael to create a safe environment for Shadow, teaching him how to recognize triggers and how to calm Shadow when panic arose. Michael learned about grounding techniques, using touch, scent, and voice to anchor Shadow back to safety. He began introducing Shadow to new experiences slowly, always watching for signs of stress. One afternoon during a session at the park, a sudden loud noise, a firework or maybe a car backfire, sent Shadow scrambling into Michael's arms. The dog trembled violently, eyes wide with terror. "It's okay, Shadow," Michael soothed, holding him close. Michael felt a fierce, protective love. This wasn't just a dog anymore. This was a friend who depended on him completely. As weeks passed, Shadow's panic attacks became less frequent. Michael's confidence in handling them grew. The bond between them deepened beyond words. Michael also began to open up about Shadow to others. At work, he shared the story of the dog who had saved him as much as he saved the dog. Co-workers started asking about Shadow, offering tips and even inviting Michael and Shadow to join weekend hikes or park visits. One day, Michael received an unexpected message from a woman named Sarah. She explained she was the person who had originally found Shadow wandering the streets and had called animal control. She'd heard Michael's story through a local rescue group and wanted to say thank you. Michael was surprised but welcomed the connection. Sarah shared pictures she'd taken of Shadow before Michael found him, thin, scared, but with a spark of spirit. "He was always a fighter," Sarah said. "You just gave him a second chance." The meeting between Michael and Sarah was emotional. They shared stories of hope and hardship, united by the desire to help Shadow thrive. Through this connection, Michael learned about local support groups for rescue animals and their owners. He began attending meetings, finding comfort in a community that understood the ups and downs of healing trauma. Shadow thrived in this new environment. Surrounded by love and support, he grew more confident, his fears slowly fading into the past. Michael realized that saving Shadow wasn't just about vet bills or medicine. It was about community, understanding, and the unwavering loyalty between a man and his dog. One evening, Michael sat on the porch with Shadow resting his head on Michael's knee. The sunset painted the sky in warm colors, a perfect ending to a challenging day. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Michael said softly. Shadow looked up, eyes filled with trust and love. Michael smiled, knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it together, because sometimes the deepest wounds heal not with time alone, but with the courage to never give up on each other. As the seasons shifted toward winter, Michael and Shadow's bond continued to grow stronger. Shadow's confidence blossomed in small but meaningful ways. He followed Michael around the apartment without fear, greeted visitors with cautious curiosity, and even enjoyed their walks without panic. Michael felt hopeful for the first time in a long while. One crisp morning, Michael woke to find Shadow sitting by the window, watching the snow fall softly outside. The dog's eyes reflected a quiet calm, a stark contrast to the trembling figure Michael had once rescued from the alley. Determined to build on this progress, Michael signed up for a basic obedience class at the local community center. He hoped the structured environment and socialization would help Shadow continue to heal. The first class was intimidating. The room was filled with dogs of all sizes, and their owners, a cacophony of barks, sniffing, and movement. Shadow initially froze, ears pinned back, eyes scanning nervously. Michael knelt beside him, whispering encouragement. "We can do this," he told Shadow gently. Slowly, Shadow began to respond to Michael's commands. Sit, stay, come. Each success brought a smile to Michael's face and a wag to Shadow's tail. The instructor praised Michael's patience and dedication. Outside class, Michael noticed Shadow growing more playful. One evening, Shadow chased a ball with enthusiasm, tongue lolling and eyes bright. Michael laughed, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years, but healing was never a straight line. One day, as Michael and Shadow returned from a walk, they encountered a group of teenagers playing loud music near the park entrance. The sudden noise startled Shadow, who barked fiercely and lunged at a passerby. Michael pulled the leash tight, calming Shadow with a firm voice. "Easy, buddy, it's okay." The passerby, a man in his 20s, looked startled but nodded. Michael apologized quickly, feeling a flush of embarrassment. Shadow's reaction reminded him how fragile their progress still was. That night, Michael couldn't shake the worry. Had Shadow's past trauma triggered something deeper? Was he ready for the challenges ahead? Michael called the behaviorist for advice and scheduled extra sessions focused on noise desensitization and impulse control. The behaviorist explained that Shadow's reaction was a normal response for a rescue dog with a traumatic history. She encouraged Michael to remain consistent, calm, and patient. Michael threw himself into Shadow's training with renewed focus. They practiced in quieter environments, gradually introducing new sounds and distractions. Slowly, Shadow's outbursts lessened. One afternoon, as a car backfired nearby, Shadow looked to Michael and waited calmly instead of reacting. "That's my boy," Michael whispered, pride shining in his eyes. Despite setbacks, Michael felt hopeful. Shadow was learning to trust the world and himself a little more each day. One evening, Michael sat beside Shadow on the couch, stroking his fur as the dog rested his head on Michael's knee. Michael reflected on their journey, the sleepless nights, the vet bills, the moments of doubt and despair. But he also thought of the laughter, the small victories, the quiet companionship that had grown between them. "You saved me, Shadow," Michael said softly. Shadow's eyes met Michael's, filled with quiet love. At that moment, Michael knew their story was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, but with each other they could face anything. Because sometimes healing comes not just from medicine or food, but from the bond between two souls who refuse to give up. And for Michael and Shadow, that bond was unbreakable. The first snow of winter blanketed the city in a soft white silence. Michael and Shadow stood side by the window, watching the flakes drift down gently. Shadow's breath formed little clouds in the chilly air, his tail wagging slowly as he took in the peaceful scene. It was hard to believe how far they'd come. From the desperate, starving dog Michael had found in an alley to this calm, confident companion who now shared Michael's life in ways Michael never expected. That morning, Michael decided it was time to take Shadow on a special trip, a visit to the countryside where Michael had grown up. He wanted Shadow to experience open fields, fresh air, and the freedom to explore without the noise and chaos of the city. Packing the car carefully with blankets, food, and Shadow's favorite toys, Michael felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Would Shadow adjust to the new environment? Would his fears return? As they drove away from the city's tall buildings and bustling streets, Michael watched Shadow settle into the back seat, his eyes calm but alert. Michael reached back and gave Shadow's head a gentle pat. "We're on an adventure, buddy," he said with a smile. Arriving at the small farmhouse Michael's family still owned, the two stepped out into the crisp air. The countryside stretched endlessly, rolling hills, tall grass swaying in the breeze, and a sky so wide it felt like it could hold every hope Michael had. Shadow sniffed eagerly, exploring the open space with a new sense of wonder. Michael let him off the leash and Shadow bounded forward, chasing leaves and darting through the grass. For the first time in years, Shadow was free, not just physically, but emotionally too. That evening, Michael sat by the fireplace. Shadow curled up beside him. The crackling flames cast a warm glow over the room, filling the space with comfort. Michael reflected on their journey, the hardships, the healing, the unspoken moments that had changed them both. He thought of the $500 vet bill that had seemed like a gamble, the long nights spent comforting a trembling dog, the slow steps toward trust and companionship. But mostly, he thought of Shadow's quiet strength, his resilience, and the way he had taught Michael to open his heart again. The next morning, Michael took Shadow on a hike through the nearby woods. The path was lined with towering trees, their branches heavy with snow. Shadow moved confidently, occasionally stopping to sniff the air or greet a curious squirrel. Michael felt a surge of pride. Shadow was no longer just surviving. He was thriving. As they reached a clearing overlooking a frozen pond, Michael sat down and called Shadow over. The dog came immediately, tail wagging happily. "You've come so far, buddy," Michael said softly. "I'm proud of you." Shadow nuzzled Michael's hand, and Michael knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Before leaving the countryside, Michael visited the local animal shelter to share Shadow's story. He wanted others to know that with patience and love, even the most broken souls could find healing. The shelter staff welcomed Michael warmly, inspired by Shadow's transformation. Michael pledged to volunteer regularly, eager to give back to the animals waiting for their own second chances. Driving back to the city, Michael looked over at Shadow, who was peacefully asleep in the passenger seat. He smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Sometimes life's unexpected turns lead us exactly where we need to be. And for Michael and Shadow, their journey was proof that kindness, courage, and unwavering loyalty could create miracles. As the city lights flickered ahead, Michael reached down to scratch behind Shadow's ears and whispered, "This is just the beginning, buddy." Shadow stirred, eyes fluttering open, and gave a soft, contented bark. Together, they were ready for whatever came next.